This is an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Peter Bogdanovich, the actor, film historian, and critic turned director of such classics as The Last Picture Show, Paper Moon, What's Up Doc, and Mask, died on January 6th of natural causes at his home in Los Angeles. He was 82. I had the pleasure of talking to him back in 1997 on my old radio show when he was promoting a huge book that he lovingly put together called Who the Devil Made It. The book featured his interviews with 16 of the greatest directors of yesteryear, and it proves that he not only loved the work he did as a director, but also all those who came before him. We started out by talking about his brief period of being a critic.
I was for a while. It was a way of getting on screening lists and seeing movies for nothing, and getting books and seeing plays for nothing. It was totally motivated by not wanting to spend my own money because I didn't have any.
I've often heard a lot of directors and actors lament what critics do to their work, and I'm just wondering, since you are a director and you have been a critic, do you have a different feeling toward critics than others do?
I don't think so. There's good critics and bad critics. There's good directors and bad directors. Some of the critics are really conscientious and really try to do what they can to popularize a work or to explain a work and so on. And then there's the critics who just want to make a reputation by attacking. Those are the ones I'm not keen on.
Talking about your book, Who the Devil Made It, which is your most recent book, you're talking basically about some of the greatest directors of all time.
Yes, that's true. The interviews that I conducted with them, I was fortunate enough to meet these legendary figures in the 60s and early 70s, and 13 of the 16 have passed away. 3 of them are still alive. I brought their interviews up to date. I think because I organized the book in order of the directors' births, chronological order of the directors' births, which mirrors pretty much their entrance into the film business. So hopefully you get a kind of panoramic view of the whole 100 years of movies, since the oldest director in the book was Alan Dwan, who began directing in 1910. And the youngest director is Sidney Lumet, who's still directing and who has 2 films coming out this year.
In what context did you get an opportunity to interview these directors? And by that I mean, were you working as a critic then, or were you already a director yourself and in some cases working under them?
When it started, really, in 1960, I was already, I had already directed in the theater and acted in the theater for 5 years. And I was a critic, too, at that time. I was making some money, making a living, doing some writing, but not too much. It kind of got more so in this early 60s. And I continued to do both, really. And the questions were motivated at least 50%, if not more, by a desire to know how they did it so that I could learn about directing.
So it was more a learning process for you. Was it ever your intention at that time to, chronicle these stories into a book form?
No. In some cases, yes, because, for example, I organized the first Howard Hawks retrospective in the United States, the Museum of Modern Art here in New York. I prepared a monograph which consisted of an interview with Hawks. So that interview was done for a purpose other than just asking questions, but the real underlying motive of all of them was to find out for myself about making pictures and also to popularize certain American artists that I thought were either underappreciated, overlooked, or misunderstood.
Why write the book now? Why not do it earlier?
Well, I don't know, honestly, Peter. It just kind of worked out that way. There's been, that line from John Lennon's song, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. For example, 2 of these interviews, several of the interviews, 4 of them are quite long. 2 of them were meant to be separate books, one on Hitchcock, one on Hawks, and for various reasons during their lifetimes, life got in the way, and I didn't get to do them as separate books. And then some of the others were actually, the Alan Dwan and the Fritz Lang were published as small little film books that hardly anybody saw, and they've been out of print for years. Then a number of them were never published at all, except little snippets here and there. But at some point a few years ago, I said, I need to go through all these interviews and see what I've got. How many have I got? I didn't even know. Some of them hadn't even been transcribed. The George Cukor interview, which was done for a TV thing, which ended up not being done, I didn't even have a chance to transcribe that. It wasn't necessary. So I did it for the book to see if it was worth anything, and it turned out to be quite a good interview. I didn't realize it was that good. So it was like that. It varied. Leo McCarey was a brilliant director who was dying of emphysema in a hospital, and I took 6 months to arrange to meet with him, and the American Film Institute actually organized it and bought the interview, and it's part of their archive. Never been printed before. So each director is a different story, but I decided it was about time to see if I had a big book here that might be valuable to people, and so I decided to err on the side of inclusiveness and included everybody I had, even short interview like the one with Joe von Sternberg or Robert Aldrich.
16 directors in the book, correct?
Yeah.
And there are so many different styles as far as the work is concerned, and certainly 16 different men. I'm just curious to know, as directors, besides the fact that they are directors, is there something you found in common in all of them?
Yeah, I would say the biggest common denominator is that they didn't grow up wanting to be movie directors. They didn't grow up, specializing in the cinema at an early age as we have so many kids today. Because the reason is simple. There was no such thing as being a movie director. It was an unknown occupation when they were starting out. They kind of fell into it in a number of different ways. And that's, I think, one of the most interesting things about each of these directors is that they developed a life experience and had experiences in life that didn't prepare them necessarily for making movies, but certainly made their movies richer because they knew about people and had experiences that were outside of show business. One of the things that's wrong with pictures today, I think, is that so many of the people making them started out wanting to, and so they specialize too soon and don't really learn much about what people and what life is like.
Did you always want to be a director yourself?
I'm afraid so. I wanted to be an actor. In fact, everybody thought I was going to be an actor from a very young age. And I was an actor, really, from the time I was 15. I was acting professionally in the theater, and even in some live television way back. Sidney Lumet directed me in a little tiny bit part in the television show, live television, way back in the late 50s. But at a certain point, and I don't really know, people have asked me this, I don't know exactly what it was that pushed me toward directing, but I think it was a naive notion that if I directed, I would be able to play all the roles, kind of greed. It backfired on me because that's not really the way it works. And so I've kind of missed acting over the years. I've done it a few times, but sorry I didn't act more.
In some cases, actors are often intimidated by some directors, and some of these characters you write about in your book, Who the Devil Made It, are certainly imposing figures.
Yeah.
Were any of them intimidating toward you?
Intimidating to me?
Yeah, were you intimidated by them, I should say?
Oh, sure. Quite a bit. Von Sternberg, Lang, all of them, really, to a degree, were intimidating because of their experience, if not their personality. Some of them were very outgoing and warm, like Alan Dwan. Some were rather somewhat more elusive and aloof, like von Sternberg. Some were, as I say, quite friendly, like Don Siegel. But there was an interest in talking to me from all of them that really was an invaluable thing for me, that I was able to share that time with them. And now that's one of the reasons I did the book, was I wanted to get it out there, particularly at this time when the craft of movies seems to be in eclipse.
Well, you've made two references now to current films. I take it you're not too happy with what's going on the screen right now.
I don't think anybody is. I mean, I talk to people, and then everybody says, what happened to the movies? I'm afraid that's how I feel.
Well, what do you think is wrong with them?
Well, I think the basic thing that's wrong, you might laugh at this, because it's a wild assumption, but you see, movies were founded in silent movies, in which the image, in which telling the story through pictures was everything. And although there were not subtitles, cards, title cards in silent pictures and and so on, there was writing in them. But the basic discipline among all picture makers in the first 30 years of movies was to try to convey the story, the characters, the nuances, everything through visual means without the use of written or spoken words. That discipline, which almost all the directors in the book either grew up with, they all grew up, with silent movies. At a certain point, whenever movies started, they were silent. And that discipline of how do we convey this visually as opposed to with dialogue informed all their movies. And as they progressed into talking pictures, that still was their main credo, despite the use of dialogue. That's a huge difference And we're so far away now. All of those directors who started in the silent era and went all the way into the talking era up to about the middle to late 60s, almost all of them have passed away. And even the second generation who kind of came in the 30s but had grown up with silent movies, that's all gone too. So what you have today, a bunch of people who have very little connection, if any, to the foundation, the very foundation of the medium.
Is it also difficult to make a film today as a director? Because from what I gather in the heyday of films, a director had a little more control over what his or her final product is, but now you have so many people involved, from agents of actors to the studios to...
Yes, it's gotten...
to marketing.
To be candid, it's gotten out of control, because everybody's a director, everybody's a producer, everybody knows everything. Nobody's under contract anymore. It's all independent. Since there is no studio structure. I mean, there's a bunch of studios, but they're essentially banks that finance pictures and put together some packages. But it isn't like the old days where everybody was under contract. I mean, you had contract directors, contract writers, contract actors mainly, and all the rest of the personnel that make pictures. They were all under contract to the individual studios. Each studio had their own people, right? Well, there's a certain security to that and a continuity to that, and it was a well-oiled machine, and it worked. It worked very well. It produced an extraordinary number of good pictures and a lot of junk, but the emphasis was definitely positive. You know, Hawks says in the book that during the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, less in the 50s, but still through the 50s, you had the greatest array of stars in the history of the world. And very few of them had anything to say about what roles they were going to play. So it tells you a lot if you compare that with today, where the actors are pretty much in control, getting outrageous amounts of money. The reason they're getting that kind of money is because the studios don't know what else to do. They don't have a clue what to do except to pay an actor a lot of money.
In talking to the directors that you spoke with to write the book, Who the Devil Made It, did you get an opportunity, especially those you talked to more recently, to look back and compare, as you have just done, the movie business from when they were working full-time to later in life?
How do you mean?
Well, you just mentioned, for instance, Hawks was talking about how it was a little different earlier, and I'm just wondering if anybody else reminisced about the so-called good old days of movie making.
I think they all do in the book. I mean, they don't necessarily reminisce about it in that way, but they all felt that things kept getting worse and that the business was better when it had a system, and the system had its own drawbacks, and there was a lot of idiocy with the production code and all those things. But nevertheless, if you look, the proof is in the pudding. If you look at the movies, by and large, they were infinitely better than what we're doing today, with all the freedom from censorship and all the money in the world. It's just, it doesn't buy talent.
What about yourself? What about your own directing? Will we be seeing something new from you?
I've got two features that are in the can. One for Showtime, which was produced by Paramount and Barbra Streisand's company, about two Catholic women who saved Jews during World War II. It's a true story. Two true stories combined into one picture called Rescuers, Two Women. And that'll be on, I think, in November with Celia Ward and Elizabeth Perkins. We shot that up in Toronto, by the way, and in Quebec late last year. And then there's another show I did in South Carolina, which is going to be on CBS, I believe, called Blessed Assurance, with Cicely Tyson and Grant Show and Lori Loughlin. I'm not sure when that's going to be on. It's a touching story about some very poor black people and some very poor white people in a southern town in the 50s.
Some of the great things...
So those are two shows of mine that are in the can but haven't been seen yet. And then I'm preparing to go to Cannes on Monday to shoot some background for a little picture about movies. And I'm preparing a couple of comedies as well that I hope to do in the next year.
Some of the great films that were made in the days gone by are, I think, reminiscent of some of the stuff you see today on cable. You mentioned Showtime. There's a lot of quality stuff on cable these days.
It's true. They have the director has more freedom. There isn't much money, but there's an enormous amount of, they let you do it if you can do it in the time. And with the budget, they're pretty good about letting you do it the way you see it. And Showtime was particularly that way. I've done 3 things for them. This is the longest thing I've done. I did a couple of short, 40-minute things for a couple of TV series that they did, Picture Windows, which was produced by Norman Jewison, and a series called Fallen Angels, produced by Sidney Pollack. I did 1 episode of each for them. That was fun. I like shooting. Mm-hmm. I like the actual process of shooting a picture, and so I try to keep busy with the shooting rather than preparing and cutting. Those are not as much fun.
In doing the book, Who the Devil Made It, and in talking to these directors, was there anything interesting you found out on a personal level about any of these characters besides their professional work?
Oh, I think in each case there was a lot of revealing comments about their personal life. Not so much really about their personal life, but you get a sense of their personal life and their personality from the questions. That was really the intention of the book and the intention of most of the interviews, which was to find the person in the films and the films in the person. That's why the title, Who the Devil Made It, comes from a remark that Howard Hawks made when I asked him which directors he had most liked over the years. He said, I liked almost anybody that made you realize who in the devil was making the picture, because the director's the storyteller and ought to have his own way of telling it. Well, that's about it.
Well, maybe it's time to get
Sums it up.
Maybe it's time to get back to that and let the directors tell the stories again.
Well, if they know how, that's the problem. And see so many movies, the younger people who are coming from MTV or coming from commercials, and there's no sense of film grammar. There's no real sense of how to tell a story visually. It's just cut, which is pretty easy.
These directors all have their place in history, and you're helping by putting them all together in one book. What about your place in history?
Well, that's not up to me, is it? I mean, that's up to other people to talk about. I made a few pictures. Some of them worked, some didn't, and I hope to make a bunch more. I'm more excited about making pictures now than I ever have been, so I think I have some good work ahead. People say they want to give me some kind of an award for my career. I say, Jesus, it's just, in the middle of it. I don't want to get an award for that yet.
I didn't mention off the top, but we should mention for those who don't know, and they should, movies like Mask, Paper Moon, The Last Picture Show, Texasville, you all did. You did all those movies. But
I meant a little picture called What's Up, Doc?
And What's Up, Doc?
Popular movie I made.
Exactly. And but I mentioned before we went to air, and I'm going to mention it to you now, two of the films I really enjoyed didn't get a lot of the critical success, but I saw them as an usher, and that's At Long Last Love and also Daisy Miller.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. I liked Daisy Miller quite a bit. At Long Last Love was very personal, but it got traduced and reduced in the version that was released. The television version is actually better, and it's all right. As I said, it has a kind of cult following. I prefer the pictures to have success in the box office than to have a cult following, but I'll take whatever I can get.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing more of your work. And
thank you.
The book is called Who the Devil Made It by Peter Bogdanovich. It features 16 directors. It is published by Knopf, and it sells in Canada for $56. And Peter, I thank you for talking with us this evening.
Thank you so much.
That was a 1997 conversation with Peter Bogdanovich, the actor, film historian, and critic-turned-director of such classic films as The Last Picture Show, Paper Moon, What's Up, Doc, and Mask. He died on January the 6th in Los Angeles at 82. Again, his book that he lovingly put together is called Who the Devil Made It. It's huge, over 800 pages, but it is a great tribute to some of the masters of filmmaking that came before him, and it more than proves his love for the art.
You've just heard an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder. To hear any or all of the full hour-long shows, visit thestufffile.com. Stuph is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's thestufffile.com. A presentation of Flying Fish Communications.